She was already there when he arrived. That was the part that stopped Jasper Hunter cold, his breath crystallizing in the bitter November air as he crested the last ridge of Blackthorn Pass and saw her. A woman, alone, standing at the very edge of the cliff shelf, as though she had been waiting for the mountain itself to answer some question she had asked it. Her dark traveling coat was dusted with snow, her valise sitting upright at her feet like a faithful dog, and her face was tipped toward the valley below with an expression he could not name from 40 yards away. It was not distress. It was not the desperate terror of someone stranded and afraid. It was something else entirely, something that sent a cold needle of wrongness straight through his chest. He had expected to find her half frozen and grateful. The liveryman in Caldwell Crossing had sent the message 3 hours ago. A woman traveling alone, stage broke down at the lower bend, gone on foot toward the high pass. Every soul in the territory knew better than to attempt Blackthorn Pass on foot in November. Every soul except apparently her. Jasper urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves finding careful purchase on the icy stone shelf, and as he drew closer the wrongness in him deepened. Because the woman was not lost. She was not confused or wandering. She was standing at a specific place, the iron survey marker driven into the rock wall at the eastern edge of the pass, the one marking the boundary of the contested Harlan land grant. And she was reading from a folded document she held with both gloved hands, reading it in the gray afternoon light with the focused, deliberate calm of someone conducting an official inspection. He pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet away. She did not startle. She turned slowly, as though she had heard him coming for the last minute and had chosen to finish reading before she acknowledged him. Her face was striking dark brows, gray eyes the color of the sky behind her, a jaw set with the particular firmness of someone who had learned that the world did not reward softness. She could not have been more than 26 or 27. There was a bruise beginning to bloom along her left cheekbone, fresh and purple, and that told its own story. "You are the search party," she said. It was not a question. "Jasper Hunter," he said. "I have the pass claim. Are you hurt, ma'am?" Something moved through her eyes, a calculation, a decision made and filed away. "Myrtle Conley," she said. "And I was not stranded, Mr. Hunter. I arrived exactly where I intended to arrive." She folded the document with care and tucked it inside her coat. "I simply happened to need assistance getting back down." He stared at her. The wind came off the upper peaks and hit them both with the force of a thrown fist, and she did not flinch. "You walked 4 miles up an ice pass in November," he said, "to read a document at a survey marker." "Yes," she said simply. "Why?" Her gray eyes found his and held them, and in that moment Jasper Hunter felt something lurch in the region below his ribs, not quite recognition, not quite danger, but something that lived in the country between the two. "Because," Myrtle Conley said, "someone is trying to take it from me." 3 weeks earlier, the land had not existed for Myrtle at all. She had been in St. Louis, working as a ledger clerk for the Harlan Trading Company, a position she had held for 4 years through a combination of genuine skill and the willingness to be invisible. Edwin Harlan ran his operation with the comfortable arrogance of a man who had never needed to examine the foundations beneath his feet, and Myrtle had spent 4 years being his foundation. She kept his books. She corrected his errors without ever letting him know they had been errors. She deciphered contracts and correspondence that arrived in his office written by lawyers who were paid specifically to make them undecipherable to ordinary people. It was in that capacity, as the invisible, indispensable, entirely unremarkable Miss Conley, that she had come across the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Edwin in a handwriting she did not recognize, sealed with plain wax rather than the company stamp that all official correspondence carried. Edwin was out at his club, as he was every Tuesday afternoon, and Myrtle had been tasked with sorting the mail, as she was every afternoon. She should have set it aside. She had set aside hundreds of letters over the years, personal correspondence that was none of her business, and she had never been tempted to do otherwise. But this one had her father's name on the inner fold. She had not meant to see it. She had simply been unfolding the outer envelope to check for the sender's address, and the inner paper had come half loose, and the name Arthur Conley had looked up at her from the page with the sudden shock of a face seen in a crowd. Her father had been dead for 6 years. She had read the letter, then she had read it again. Then she had sat for a long time at her clerk's desk in the back office of the Harlan Trading Company, while the afternoon light moved across the floorboards, and she had felt the particular cold clarity that comes when the world you believed you were living in dissolves and reveals the world that was actually there all along. The letter was from a land attorney in Denver named Alastair Croft. It laid out, in careful legal language, the details of a land grant that had been filed in 1873 in the Colorado Territory, a grant of 400 acres in the high mountain range west of Caldwell Crossing, filed by a man named Arthur Conley in partnership with Edwin Harlan. The letter explained that the partnership agreement had included a provision: if Arthur Conley died before the land was developed, his half of the grant would revert to Edwin Harlan, unless Arthur had living heirs who could be located within a period of 10 years. The 10-year period, the letter noted with something that read like polite urgency, would expire on the 15th of December, 1882. In 5 weeks' time. The letter ended with a warning. Croft wrote that it was his legal obligation to inform Edwin that he had received an inquiry from a woman claiming to be Arthur Conley's daughter, and that if this claim was verified, she would have legal standing to contest the reversion of the land to the Harlan estate. Croft advised Edwin to act quickly, and to be certain that any such claimant was either discredited or the word was quietly elided, replaced with a phrase about ensuring that all documentary records were in order managed. Myrtle had put the letter back in its envelope, sealed it with a fresh drop of wax, and placed it on Edwin Harlan's desk. Then she had gone home, taken everything she owned that mattered: her father's pocket watch, his surveying compass, the single photograph she had of him, and every document she had kept from his estate, and she had packed a valise. Her father had told her in the last weeks before the fever took him that he had left her something. He had been half delirious, and she had been 20 years old and frightened, and she had held his hand and told him to rest, and she had not pressed him on what he meant by something. She had assumed he meant the compass. He had been a surveyor for 20 years. The compass was the most valuable thing he owned. He had meant 400 acres in the Colorado Territory. She had arrived in Caldwell Crossing 8 days later, having traveled by rail to Denver and then by stage across the high plain, carrying her father's original survey documents and the copy of the partnership agreement she had found in his old tin box. She had engaged a room at the hotel in Caldwell Crossing and presented herself to the county record's office the following morning, only to be told by a red-faced man named Pettiford that the relevant records were currently undergoing what he called administrative review and were not available for public inspection. Administrative review. She had known immediately what that meant. Edwin's reach had arrived before her. Not by much. She could see in Pettiford's nervous manner that the instruction had come recently, but enough to block the most direct path. So she had taken an indirect path. She had hired a man named Fellows to drive her as far as the stage would go toward the pass, on the theory that if she could get eyes on the survey marker herself, could confirm its placement relative to her father's original documents, she would have enough physical evidence to challenge whatever Edwin's lawyers tried to file. Fellows had driven her to within 1.5 miles of the pass before his stage horse threw a shoe on a stretch of icy road, and the whole enterprise ground to a halt. Myrtle had looked at the remaining distance. She had looked at the iron sky and the temperature and the failing afternoon. She had thought about Edwin Harlan and his lawyers and the 15th of December and the name Arthur Conley looking up at her from a stranger's letter. Then she had picked up her valise and started walking. She had made it. She had found the marker. She had compared its placement to her father's survey notes and confirmed, with a satisfaction so profound it had briefly stopped her breath, that her father's claim was exactly what his documents said it was: 400 acres stretching from the pass down through the most productive timber valley in the upper range. Then she had turned around to walk back down and discovered that the icy trail she had climbed had become a sheet of ice in the declining temperature, and that her city boots were entirely unequal to descending it without a very high likelihood of going off the edge. That was when she had stood still and waited, because standing still was what the situation called for. That was what Jasper Hunter had found when he crested the pass. He brought her down on his horse, which meant she had to sit behind him on the animal's broad back and hold on to the wool of his coat, while the horse picked its way down the ice trail with the careful patience of a creature that knew exactly how much was at stake. Myrtle held on with both hands and kept her eyes on the trail ahead and tried not to think about the warmth of his back through the wool, the solid reality of his shoulders, the way the horse's movement pressed them together with every careful step. She had not been held by anything warm in a very long time. Jasper Hunter did not speak on the way down. She appreciated that. She had met men who filled silence with noise because silence frightened them, and she had always found them exhausting. This man sat his horse with an easy competence and guided them down a trail that would have killed her if she had tried it alone, and he did not ask her questions she was not ready to answer. And when they reached the flat ground at the base of the pass and the temperature dropped another 5 degrees with the coming dark, he pulled a wool blanket from his saddlebag and handed it back to her without turning around. "Thank you," she said. "Welcome," he said, and clicked his horse forward. She watched the back of his head as they rode toward the lights of Caldwell Crossing. He was a large man, not in the soft way of city men who ate well, but in the lean, compressed way of someone who had spent years at altitude doing physical work, as though the mountain had pressed him into a specific and useful shape. His hair was dark under his hat, shot through at the temples with early gray, and she put his age at perhaps 32 or 33. He wore the kind of quiet that was not shyness but preference. It occurred to her, as the lights of town grew closer, that he had said his name was Jasper Hunter, and that he had the pass claim. She had been too focused on her own situation to hear the full implication of that. The pass claim. Blackthorn Pass. Her father's land abutted Blackthorn Pass on 3 sides. She thought about the letter from Alastair Croft. She thought about Edwin Harlan and his lawyers and the administrative review of county records. She thought about the bruise on her cheekbone, which had been put there not by any of Edwin's men but by a different problem altogether. A drunk in a Denver hotel corridor who had mistaken her door for his own and been unhappy about being corrected. A story that had nothing to do with any of this, but which she had decided she would not share with a stranger. She thought about the particular way Jasper Hunter had looked at her on the pass, that arrested look, as though she had solved and created a puzzle at the same moment. She thought about 400 acres and the 15th of December and her father's name on a stranger's letter. She thought about the wool blanket around her shoulders, which smelled of wood smoke and pine resin, and a particular human warmth that she had no business thinking about. "Mr. Hunter," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "What exactly is your relationship to the Harlan land grant?" The horse's gait did not change. His shoulders did not shift. But there was a half-second of something, a pause so small she would not have caught it if she had not been paying attention before he answered. "My family has held the pass claim for 11 years, he said. "The Harlan grant sits adjacent." "Adjacent," she said carefully. "On which boundary?" Another small pause. "The eastern one." Her father's survey notes had the eastern boundary listed as the most valuable section, the one where the timber was densest, where a mill could be established, where the whole enterprise of developing the land would begin. She tucked that information away quietly, the way she had learned to tuck information away, without expression, without any shift in her posture that would tell him she found it significant. They rode the rest of the way into town in silence. He took her to the hotel on Main Street, the same hotel where she had a room, and helped her down from the horse with the same efficient courtesy he seemed to apply to everything, and handed her the blanket, and said that she should see someone about the bruise. She thanked him. He nodded and started to turn his horse. "Mr. Hunter," she said again. He looked back. In the lamplight from the hotel porch, his face was all planes and shadows, difficult to read, and she thought that this was probably intentional in a man who had learned that being readable was a liability. "I am going to need a guide to the pass again," she said. "Someone who knows the trail. I will pay a fair wage." He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she had to fight the impulse to look away, which was something she almost never had to fight. "What business did you have at the pass?" he said. "My own," she said. He almost smiled. She could see it at the corner of his mouth, that small, arrested movement that was not quite amusement and not quite respect but lived in the country between them. "Come to the land office tomorrow morning," he said. 7 o'clock. I will hear what you are offering." She watched him ride away into the dark. The cold had settled fully around Caldwell Crossing, the kind of deep, dry cold of the high Colorado Territory in late November, and her breath made small clouds in the lamplight, and her feet were numb in their inadequate city boots, and she was thinking about the eastern boundary and the 15th of December, and a man who sat his horse with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to explain himself to anyone. She went inside and asked the desk clerk for a cup of hot tea and another blanket, and she sat by the stove in the small lobby and spread her father's survey notes across her knees and began to think very carefully about what she was going to say at 7 o'clock in the morning. The land office in Caldwell Crossing was a single room in a building that had started as a general store and been incompletely converted, so that half the shelves still held preserved goods, and the smell of old coffee and dried beans competed with the sawdust and ink of official records. Jasper Hunter was there before her, standing at the counter with a mug of coffee and the particular stillness of a man who had not slept well. Myrtle arrived at 4 minutes before 7 and put her valise on the counter and took out her father's documents without preamble. "Arthur Conley," she said, "was my father. He was a surveyor employed by the Colorado Territorial Land Commission from 1868 to 1876. In 1873, he filed a land grant for 400 acres in the upper range west of this town, in partnership with Edwin Harlan. The partnership agreement included a reversion clause. My father died in 1876. I was his only heir, and I was 20 years old, and I did not know about the grant because my father did not tell me about it, likely because he did not want me to know that he had done business with a man like Edwin Harlan. I have since learned that the reversion clause contains a provision for living heirs, and that I have until the 15th of December to establish my claim. Edwin Harlan knows this, and he is attempting to prevent me. The county records have been placed under administrative review, which I take to mean that the relevant files have been made temporarily unavailable. I need access to the pass to conduct a physical survey comparison, and I need someone who knows the terrain and is not connected to Edwin Harlan. Are you connected to Edwin Harlan?" Jasper Hunter had listened to all of this with his coffee mug halfway to his mouth and a look on his face that she could only describe as careful. When she finished, he set the mug down. "No," he said. "Does he have any interest in your pass claim?" Something shifted in his expression, something that looked briefly like an old and difficult anger. "He has tried," he said. "What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment. He picked up the top sheet of her father's documents and read it without touching it, hands braced on the counter, leaning forward with the focused attention of someone who understood what he was looking at. "Your father knew what he was doing," he said. "This survey work is precise." "He was precise," Myrtle said. "In all things." Jasper looked up from the document. Their eyes met across the counter, and she felt it again, that lurch, that thing that lived in the country between recognition and danger, and this time she did not look away from it. Edwin Harlan has been trying to establish that his land grant extends to the western edge of my pass claim, Jasper said. He has filed 2 amended surveys in the past 3 years, both of which I have successfully challenged. I believe he wants the pass itself because the pass is the only viable route to the upper valley. He paused. If the eastern boundary of the Conley grant is where this document says it is, then his amended surveys are not just wrong. They are deliberately wrong. Myrtle thought about the letter from Alastair Croft about the word managed. Yes, she said. That is what I believe. You walked 4 miles up an ice pass alone to confirm it. I needed to see it myself. He looked at her for another long moment. Outside the land office, the morning sounds of Caldwell Crossing were coming to life. Boots on frozen ground, the clatter of a freight wagon, someone calling to someone across the street in the cold air. I will take you up to the pass again, he said, but not alone. I have a man who works for me, name of Davis, who has 10 years of survey experience. We go as a proper survey party, we document everything, we do it right. That will take longer than I have available, she said. It will take 4 days, he said, and it will produce documentation that a judge cannot dismiss. If you rush this and produce half a survey, Harlan's lawyers will tear it apart. She had not thought of it from that angle, and she recognized, with a small internal concession she did not let reach her face, that he was right. 4 days, she said. We leave the day after tomorrow. You need appropriate boots and a heavier coat. There is a dry goods store on Elm Street that will have what you need. He picked up his coffee. And Miss Conley. Yes. Tell no one what we are doing, not the hotel staff, not anyone you have spoken to since arriving. Harlan has people in this town. I do not know who all of them are, but I know he has them. She thought of Pettiford at the county records office, red-faced and evasive. I know, she said. She went to the dry goods store and bought boots and a coat and a pair of heavy wool gloves, spending more of her carefully hoarded funds than she wanted to. And she told the store's proprietor that she was going on a leisure ride to see the scenery before the full winter set in, which she could tell he did not believe, but which he also did not challenge because it was not his business. She ate her meals in her room. She read her father's survey documents until she could recite them from memory. On the second night, a message was slipped under her hotel room door. It was unsigned. It said only, "Leave Caldwell Crossing. The land is not yours to fight over. You will lose more than a piece of ground." She sat on the edge of her bed with the note in her hands and thought about Edwin Harlan, about his office in St. Louis where she had spent 4 years being invisible, about the comfortable arrogance of a man who had taken her father's land and assumed there was no one left to object to it. She thought about Arthur Conley's pocket watch in her valise, the one he had carried every day of his working life, the one with the small dent on its case from a time a horse had knocked it out of his hand on a rocky slope in the Colorado Territory. In the high country, near a pass, she tore the note into pieces and put them in the stove. She was outside Jasper Hunter's office at 5 in the morning on the day they were to leave, sitting on her new valise in her new boots and her new coat, and when he arrived 20 minutes later with his horse and a packed mule and a lean, weathered man she took to be Davis, he looked at her and then at the position of the stars in the sky and said, without surprise, "You are early." "I could not sleep," she said. "Neither could I," he said, and there was something in the flatness of it that made her think it was not a polite reciprocation but the truth. Davis was a quiet man of perhaps 55, with the angular, patient face of someone who had spent decades reading landscape, and he shook Myrtle's hand with a directness that she found immediately trustworthy. He said almost nothing for the first 2 hours of the ride, which suited her perfectly, and when he did speak it was to point out landmarks with terse precision, rock formations, watercourse scars, the remnants of earlier survey posts driven into hillsides in years past. They made camp the first night at a rock shelf 4 miles from the pass. In a spot that Jasper clearly knew well, there was a natural windbreak of boulders on 2 sides and a steep spring nearby that had not yet frozen. And he had the fire going in minutes with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Davis made coffee in a battered pot and heated beans in a pan, and they ate quickly in the cold, and Myrtle sat close enough to the fire to be warm and looked at the stars, which at this altitude were of a clarity she had never seen in St. Louis. So many and so bright that they seemed to press down against the dark like something urgent trying to be heard. "Your father surveyed this area," Jasper said. He was sitting across the fire from her, his long legs folded, turning his coffee mug in his hands the way she had noticed he did when he was thinking. "Did he tell you about it?" "He told me about the mountains," she said. "He talked about the high country in the way some men talk about," she paused. "About something they love." Jasper looked at the fire. "I understand that. Did you grow up here?" "My father came in 1861. He took the pass claim in 1871 when I was 21. He died in 1875, and I took it over." He said this without self-pity, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had absorbed loss and continued moving. "The mountain has been the whole of my life. Do you have family, a wife?" She asked it with the professional neutrality she had learned in 4 years as a ledger clerk, the tone that extracted information without implying personal interest. "No," he said. Then, after a moment, "You?" "No." Davis had his bedroll out and was already asleep with his back to the fire. Jasper and Myrtle sat on opposite sides of the small blaze in the deep mountain quiet, and the fire popped and the wind moved in the pines above them, and Myrtle thought about her father camping in country like this, reading his instruments in the lamplight, filing his papers in the morning, building something careful and true that had survived him. "He deserved to have known what it became," she said, half to herself. Jasper looked up at her. "The land, the grant, what it means, that it has value." He always, she stopped. The firelight made her feel more transparent than she was comfortable with, as though the warmth of it softened the professional shell she had been maintaining. "He always worried that he was leaving me with nothing. I think he believed he had failed me somehow. He had not." Jasper was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "he had not." And there was something in the simplicity of it, not comfort offered reflexively, but an actual judgment made that undid something small and tight in her chest. She went asleep in her bedroll with her father's compass in her hand. The second day they worked their way up toward the pass proper, Davis taking careful measurements with his transit level, while Myrtle followed with her father's notes and called out the original readings. Jasper ranged ahead and behind, keeping watch in a way that did not announce itself, but was there in the way his eyes moved over the landscape, the way his hand occasionally rested on the rifle in his saddle scabbard without touching it. On the third hour of the second day, Davis straightened up from his instrument and said, "There is someone following us." Jasper was already off his horse. He moved to the tree line with a speed that was startling from a man who usually moved as though time did not press him, and he came back 5 minutes later with a cold expression. "2 men," he said quietly, "far back but not trying hard to stay hidden. They want us to know they are there." "Harlan's men," Myrtle said. "Almost certainly." "Do we stop?" "No," he said. "We work faster." They worked faster. Davis was extraordinary when he was moving with purpose, his measurements precise and rapid, his notes neat and complete, his understanding of the landscape so deep that he sometimes corrected the old survey post's positions before he had even checked them against Myrtle's documents. By the time they reached the pass that afternoon, Myrtle had 4 pages of confirmed measurement comparisons, each one demonstrating the same thing. Her father's survey was accurate. The original boundary markers were where Myrtle Conley had placed them, and Edwin Harlan's amended surveys were, as Jasper had suggested, and she had believed, deliberately wrong. The falsification was not crude. She had expected crude from a man like Edwin, and she found instead something that required a professional surveyor with a specific knowledge of how legal challenges were likely to be mounted. Harlan had hired someone who understood the law, someone who had moved the eastern boundary of the grant by 1/3 of a mile in the amended documents, just enough to subsume the most valuable timber section into territory claimed by the Harlan estate proper, while retaining the original corners so that a casual inspection would not catch the discrepancy. It was precise, careful, and completely fraudulent. She stood at the survey marker, the same iron stake she had been reading when Jasper first found her, and felt the anger move through her like a cold current. This had been her father's work. Careful, honest, painstaking work done by a man who had trusted his instruments and his training and the system that was supposed to honor both. Edwin Harlan had hired someone to quietly erase it. "Miss Conley," Jasper said. He was at her elbow, close enough that she was aware of his warmth in the mountain cold. "We have what we need." "I know," she said. She was still looking at the marker. "Are you all right?" She turned to look at him. They were standing very closer than they had been before. The proximity a consequence of the crowded ledge and the wind that had come up in the past hour. His face was serious and attentive and without the careful blankness he sometimes wore, and she could see in his dark eyes the particular concern of someone who understands what he is looking at when he sees controlled anger being maintained by will alone. "He took 6 years from me," she said. "From my father's memory. 6 years of not knowing what he had left me, 6 years of not knowing that there was something to fight for." "You know now," Jasper said. "Fight now." It was so simple, so direct. She drew a slow breath and felt the cold air settle her, the way the high mountain air had always settled her father, she supposed, the way it worked on people who came to it with something unresolved. "Yes," she said. They descended more quickly than they had climbed, because Davis had everything he needed, and because the two distant figures they had spotted earlier were no longer visible, which Jasper said was more concerning than their presence had been. They made camp at the same rock shelf. Davis produced more beans and coffee, and this time Myrtle helped, glad of the task, glad of something physical to do with the anger that was still moving in her. She was aware of Jasper watching her without watching her, that peripheral attention she had noticed the day before, which did not feel like surveillance but like something different, something she was not ready to name. After Davis was asleep, she said, "Tell me about Harlan. What did he do to you?" Jasper was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "He tried to buy my pass claim. I refused. He filed a legal challenge saying the original grant was improperly filed. I beat it in court. He tried to buy it again through an intermediary so I would not know it was him. I found out and refused again." A pause. "Last spring one of my horses was shot in the upper pasture." The directness of it, the simple, unembellished horror of it made her chest ache. "I am sorry," she said. "I could not prove it was his men." "I know the pattern," she said. "He does it the same way in business, not directly, always through layers." Jasper looked at her. "You worked for him for 4 years. Why did you stay so long?" She considered the question. She had asked it of herself many times. "Because being invisible in his office meant I understood how he operated," she said, "which is a form of power, even when it does not feel like it. And when you found the letter, I stopped being invisible." He was looking at her with that careful, arrested expression again, the one she had first seen on the pass. "You came here alone," he said, "with nothing but your father's old documents and whatever money you had saved." "Yes, that is either very brave or very reckless." "My father would have said it was both," she said. "He believed that the two qualities occupied the same body most of the time." Jasper almost smiled, that small, arrested movement at the corner of his mouth. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I knew," Myrtle said simply. They returned to Caldwell Crossing on the 4th day with a complete set of survey comparisons, signed and witnessed by Davis, whose legal standing as a licensed survey professional would be unassailable in a Colorado Territory court. Myrtle had the documents organized and cross-referenced by the time they rode into town, working in her saddle with the survey notes spread across her thighs, a system she had developed by watching her father work from horseback 20 years ago. She had also been thinking, during the long hours of riding, about what came next and about the particular shape of what she was thinking. She had come to Colorado Territory for her father's land. She had not come for anything else. She had told herself this every time she was aware of Jasper Hunter's presence. The easy authority with which he moved through the landscape, the quality of his attention, the way the mountains seemed to cooperate with him as though they had a long understanding between them. She had told herself that very firmly, and she was beginning to suspect that she did not entirely believe it. She went to the law office of a man named Granger on the afternoon of their return, which Jasper had recommended as the one attorney in Caldwell Crossing who was definitively not in Edwin Harlan's pocket, largely because Granger had beaten Harlan in the pass claim challenge 2 years before, and they were consequently not on speaking terms. Granger was a small, precise man in his 50s with spectacles and the slightly offended expression of someone who had spent a career watching people behave badly, and he went through Myrtle's documents with a focused speed that told her he was both intelligent and genuinely interested. "This is solid," he said when he had finished. "The falsification in the amended surveys is demonstrable. You would need a judge who understands survey documentation, and there are only 2 in this territory I would trust with something this technical, but that is manageable." "I have 12 days, Myrtle said. "The reversion clause specifies December 15th, Granger said. "We file for a hearing in Denver on the grounds of fraudulent survey amendment. If I telegraph today and tomorrow morning we can request an emergency hearing before the deadline. The court will not like it, but they will take it." He looked at her over his spectacles. "Harlan will contest everything. He will bring lawyers from St. Louis. He will challenge your standing as heir. Do you have documentation of your relationship to Arthur Conley?" She put her father's birth certificate, her own birth certificate, and the photograph on his desk. Granger looked at the photograph for a moment. "Is that you and your father?" "Yes, on a survey site in Missouri in 1869. I was 11. Something in Granger's face shifted, a small, professional softening. "All right, Miss Conley," he said. "Let us fight." She walked out of Granger's office into the sharp cold of the Caldwell Crossing Main Street and stood for a moment with the sky immense above her, blue-gray and enormous, the way Colorado sky always was, pressing down with its beauty and its indifference. She felt, for the first time since she had read Alistair Croft's letter in Edwin's back office, something that was not quite hope but was very close to it. Jasper was waiting outside. He was leaning against the hitching post with his hands in his coat pockets and his hat tilted against the light, and he straightened when she came out with a question in his expression that he did not vocalize. "He thinks we can do it," she said. Something in Jasper's face relaxed. "Good," he said. They stood for a moment on the frozen boardwalk, in the cold afternoon, the sounds of the town around them, and Myrtle was aware of how close they were standing, close enough that the warmth of him reached her, close enough that she could see the specific gray at his temples and the lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into mountain wind, and she thought that she had not stood this close to a person who mattered to her in a very long time, and that the word mattered had appeared in that thought without any planning on her part. "Miss Conley," he said, "Mr. Hunter." "I would like to buy you dinner," he said, "if that is acceptable." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the same careful, direct attention he gave everything, and underneath the care there was something else, something open and honest and a little bit uncertain, and the uncertainty on the face of a man who was otherwise so composed was the thing that decided her. "Yes," she said, "it is acceptable." They ate at the hotel dining room, which was the best the town offered, plain food done well, beef and potatoes and bread, and a half bottle of wine that Jasper ordered with the slight self-consciousness of a man who did not usually do such things, and was doing it on purpose tonight. They talked for 2 hours, and the talking was nothing like the careful, functional conversation they had been having for the past 4 days. It ranged across everything: Myrtle's 4 years in St. Louis, the specific quality of loneliness that came with being competent and invisible in someone else's enterprise, her father's stories about the high country, the way the mountains had existed in her imagination before she had ever seen them. Jasper talked about his father, about the pass claim, about the particular silence of the high country in deep winter which he said was like nothing else in the world, a silence so complete it felt like a presence rather than an absence. He talked about the horse that had been shot. He said it quietly, without drama, but she could see in his face what it had cost him, not just the animal but the violation of the mountain, the place he had made his world, being touched by Edwin Harlan's indifference. "I am going to be your neighbor," she said. It came out before she had fully thought it through, and she heard the small, strange weight of it, the future tense, the assumption of victory, the word neighbor and all its implications. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his wine glass. "I had thought about that," he said, and he looked up at her. "And I cannot say that I find the prospect unwelcome," he said. It was such careful language, so precisely chosen. She thought about a man who lived alone in the high country with the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had stopped expecting the world to offer him anything, and who was now choosing his words about proximity to her with the same precision he gave to everything, because precision was the only way he knew to be honest without gambling more than the moment could bear. "Mr. Hunter," she said. "Jasper," he said. It was the first time he had offered it. "Jasper," she said, and the name felt like something solid and specific in her mouth, like a tool made for a particular use. "I came here for my father's land." "I know," he said. "I had not intended to," she paused, "to find anything else." He was very still. "No," he said, "neither had I." The fire in the dining room stove crackled. The candle between them was burning low. Somewhere outside a horse moved on the frozen street and a man's voice called something brief and unintelligible across the cold. "I need to win this case first," she said. "Yes," he said, "you do." "But after," she said. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The thing between them had been stated and was now in the room with them, no longer requiring words. They walked out into the street after dinner and he walked her to the hotel door. And there was a moment on the step where they both stopped and looked at each other in the cold, dark air, and Myrtle felt her heart doing something that she had not authorized it to do, something warm and complicated. And Jasper looked at her with that open, uncertain something in his face that she was already thinking of as his real expression, the one underneath the competence and the quiet. "Good night, Myrtle," he said. "Good night, Jasper," she said. She went inside and stood in the lobby for a moment with her hand on the stove rail, not cold, not thinking about Edwin Harlan, not thinking about December 15th, thinking about a dark-haired man who had found her at the top of a mountain doing what she had come to do and who had not been surprised by it. 3 days later, 2 things happened on the same morning. The first was that Granger received a telegram from Denver confirming an emergency hearing date for December 12th, 3 days before the reversion deadline, before a judge named Hartwell, who Granger said was as close to incorruptible as the Colorado Territory judiciary currently offered. The second was that Myrtle received a visitor. She was in Granger's office reviewing the hearing filings when the door opened, and a man walked in who she had not seen in 6 years but recognized immediately. His name was Roland Croft, and he was the son of Alastair Croft, the land attorney whose letter she had found in Edwin Harlan's office. He was about 40, well-dressed for the frontier, and he had the particular expression of a man who was accustomed to arriving in rooms and having them reconfigure around him. He looked at Myrtle and then at the documents on Granger's desk. His face went through several things quickly. "Miss Conley," he said. "I represent Edwin Harlan's interests in this territory." "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know why I am here." "To offer me money," she said. He paused, the prepared speech interrupted. "To offer you a settlement," he said. "A generous one. My client is prepared to compensate you fairly for any interest you might have in the grant, given the ambiguity of your legal standing." "There is no ambiguity in my legal standing," Myrtle said. "I have my father's birth records, my own birth records, and a set of survey comparisons demonstrating that the amended surveys filed on behalf of your client are fraudulent." Roland Croft's expression went flat. "That is a serious allegation." "It is a factual description," she said. Granger, who had been observing all of this from behind his desk with the expression of a man watching a performance he had paid to see, cleared his throat. "Mr. Croft," he said, "I believe Miss Conley has been clear. We will see your client's argument at the hearing." Croft looked at Myrtle for a long moment with something in his eyes that was not quite a threat and was not quite respect but was a border between the two. "My client is not someone who accepts defeat gracefully," he said. "Tell him," Myrtle said, "that neither am I." After Croft left, Granger was quiet for a moment and then said, with something approaching admiration, "I see why your father was a surveyor." "What do you mean?" "Precision," he said. "He gave you precision." Jasper heard about Croft's visit within the hour because Caldwell Crossing was small and because the arrival of a well-dressed lawyer at Granger's office was the kind of event that moved through a small town quickly. He came to the hotel that evening, knocking on her door with a contained urgency. She let him in and he looked around the room, once taking in the organized documents, the cross-referenced files, the systematic order she had imposed on the space, and then he looked at her. "Are you all right?" he said. "I am fine," she said. "He offered me money." "How much?" "He did not specify." "Harlan must be concerned," Jasper said. "He does not spend money trying to make problems go away unless the problems are real." "He is very concerned," she said. "Which means we have built something solid." She sat down at the small desk. "Jasper, I need to tell you something." He sat down on the edge of the bed, which was the only other place to sit in the room, and looked at her attentively. "If I win this hearing," she said, "I will own 400 acres adjacent to your past claim. I will own the Timber Valley. I have been thinking about what to do with it, and I do not." She stopped. "I have been a ledger clerk for 4 years. I know how to run numbers. I do not know how to run a land operation in the Colorado Territory." He was listening carefully. "I have been thinking that a partnership might be worth discussing," she said, trying for the professional neutrality she had practiced for years and finding it slipping, because the word partnership meant too many things in this room, and she could not entirely contain them. "A practical one. The past claim and the Timber Valley are more valuable together than separately. You know this land. I know finance and organization." Jasper was quiet for a long time. He was looking at his hands, which were braced on his knees, and she could see him working through something careful and internal. "A business partnership," he said. "Yes." "That would make us neighbors," he said, and there was a careful emphasis on the word that made her think of dinner last week and the candle burning low and the thing that had been stated and left in the room. "We discussed that possibility," she said. "We did," he said. He looked up at her. The lamplight in the hotel room was warm and close, and there was no fire between them to manage the distance. "Myrtle," he said. "Yes." "I have been living alone at this altitude for 7 years," he said, "and in that time I have met a great many people, and I have found almost none of them worth extending myself for, because the mountain asks a great deal of you and you do not have anything left over for people who require things you cannot give." He stopped. She was very still. "You are not a person who requires things that cannot be given," he said. She felt her throat close briefly with something she did not want to put a name to, because she was in the middle of the most important fight of her life, and she was sitting in a hotel room in Caldwell Crossing, Colorado Territory in November 1882, and she was not supposed to be experiencing this particular feeling right now. But it was there. She breathed through it. "No," she said. "I do not think I am." He stood up, which meant he was very close because the room was small, and he looked down at her with that open, uncertain expression, the real one, the one she now thought of as hers, and he said, "Win your case first." "That is what I said," she reminded him. "Then I said after," he said. "Yes," she said. "You did." He left. She sat at the desk for a long time without looking at anything, her hands flat on the table, breathing. Win first. The journey to Denver took 2 days by stage, which Granger managed with the efficient discomfort of a small man who found coach travel physically disagreeable but professionally inescapable. Jasper rode alongside the stage on horseback for the first half-day. until the road widened enough that there was clearly no risk of an ambush, and then he fell back. Myrtle watched him through the stage window until the road curved and he disappeared, and she thought about the word after. The hearing was on December 12th, in a courtroom that smelled of coal smoke and wet wool, before Judge Hartwell, who was a large, gray-haired man with the focused attention of someone who had heard too many dishonest arguments to waste any patience on inattention. Edwin Harlan's legal team consisted of 3 men from a St. Louis firm, the lead of whom was a silky, confident man named Pemberton, who opened by challenging Myrtle standing as Arthur Conley's heir, and spent 45 minutes introducing documents that Myrtle had last seen in the files of the Harlan Trading Company, which meant he had had access to Edwin's archives and had pulled everything that might be used against her. Granger let Pemberton finish. Then he laid out the survey comparison documents, item by item, measurement by measurement, with Davis's signed certification on each page. Hartwell asked precise questions and Granger gave precise answers, and Pemberton interrupted twice and was told both times to sit down. Myrtle testified about finding the letter, about her father's original partnership documents, about the specific discrepancies between the original survey and the amended versions. She was under oath and she was specific and she was not afraid, and she could feel Pemberton's team trying to find a crack in her testimony and not finding one because there was no crack to find. She had told the truth. The truth was very solid. Hartwell called a 30-minute recess and came back and said that on the basis of the physical survey evidence, he was prepared to make a preliminary ruling that the amended surveys filed on behalf of the Harlan estate showed clear evidence of deliberate falsification, and that he was therefore ruling in favor of the claimant's standing. He did not rule on the full land grant question. That would require a further hearing, but he issued an injunction preventing the reversion of the contested land until the matter was fully adjudicated, which meant the December 15th deadline was no longer operative. Pemberton appealed immediately. Hartwell heard the appeal, considered it for 8 minutes, and denied it. Myrtle sat very still at the plaintiff's table after the gavel came down, and felt something in her chest that was too large and too complicated for the small professional movement she permitted herself, which was to fold her hands on the table and breathe. Granger, to his credit, simply said, "Well done, Miss Conley." "Well done, Mr. Granger," she said. "Your father would be pleased," he said, and that was the thing that finally reached her, the particular warm knife of it, and she pressed her lips together and nodded once. She was back in Caldwell Crossing on December 14th, stepping off the evening stage into the cold dark of the main street with her valise and her legal victories, and the particular bone-deep tiredness of someone who had been running on Will for 3 weeks. The street was quiet. The hotel was lit up. There were 2 horses at the hitching post, and one of them was Jasper's, which she recognized because she had been paying attention to his horse the way she paid attention to things that mattered. He was in the hotel lobby standing at the window, and he turned when she came through the door, and the expression on his face when he saw her, the uncomplicated, unguarded relief of it, was the most honest thing anyone had shown her in years. "You won," he said. "The first round," she said. "There will be more hearings, but the land cannot revert. The deadline is gone." He crossed the lobby, and she had one moment of understanding what was about to happen before he took her face carefully in both hands and kissed her. And it was not tentative, and it was not impulsive. It was the considered, fully committed act of a man who had decided something and was stating it clearly. She kissed him back with the same completeness, her hands going to the front of his coat, her valise dropping to the floor with a thud, and the hotel clerk at the desk examined the register with absolute concentration. When they separated, she looked up at him, and he was looking at her with that open, real expression, the certain one, and she thought that she had been watching it emerge from behind the careful competence for 3 weeks now, every time they sat across a fire or read documents together or argued about survey methodology or said goodnight in a cold street, and this was where it had been going the whole time. After, she said. After, he said. They talked until nearly midnight in the hotel parlor, about everything that came next, the full land adjudication, which Granger expected to take another few months, the question of what Myrtle would do in the meantime, the business partnership she had proposed in the hotel room 2 weeks ago, which they now discussed with the frankness of two people who were also discussing the thing underneath the business partnership without pretending they were not. "You cannot go back to St. Louis," he said. "I had not intended to. The winter up here is serious. I am not," he paused. "I am not trying to alarm you. I am telling you because you should know what the high country asks." "My father spent 15 winters in the high country," she said. "I grew up on his descriptions. I know what it asks. And you are not afraid of it." "I am afraid of many things," she said. "The cold is not one of them." He looked at her with that small, almost smile. "You walked 4 miles up an icy pass in November in city boots," he said. "Which I have since remedied," she said, and extended one foot to show him the sensible mountain boots she had bought on his advice. He looked at the boot, and then back at her face, and his almost smile became an actual one. And it was a devastating thing on a face that had been so carefully composed, wide and warm, and entirely unguarded. She felt it somewhere fundamental. "Stay," he said. It was very quiet. "I intend to," she said. Edwin Harlan's legal team filed 3 more challenges over the following 4 months. Granger and Myrtle answered each one, with Davis's survey documentation and the growing weight of the preliminary ruling in their favor. Pemberton was good. She had to admit that, privately. But he was working with materials that were compromised at their foundation, and no amount of legal skill could make falsified documents true. By April of 1883, Judge Hartwell had heard enough and issued a final ruling confirming Myrtle Conley's ownership of 400 acres in the Upper Range west of Caldwell Crossing, as specified in the original 1873 grant filed by Arthur Conley in partnership with Edwin Harlan. Edwin Harlan received this news in St. Louis, according to a letter Myrtle received from a former colleague at the trading company, by throwing his morning coffee across the room. She read this detail with something that was not quite satisfaction, but lived in its immediate neighborhood. She was standing at the window of what had become her room in Jasper's mountain house when she read the letter, a room that was hers because she had moved out of the hotel in January, which had been a fact of some note in Caldwell Crossing, but which both Myrtle and Jasper had regarded with the equanimity of people who had agreed on what they were doing and did not require the town's approval. The house was a log structure on the western side of the pass, solid and specific, with views that on clear days extended to a horizon so remote it looked like the edge of the world. It smelled of wood smoke and pine and coffee, and it had accumulated over the winter a quality that Myrtle recognized as home, which was something she had not had since her father died. She put down the letter and looked out the window at the pass, which was brilliant with late April snow, and felt the full weight of what had happened, all of it, from the letter in Edwin's office to this window in this house on this mountain, and it was heavy and light at the same time, the way complete things are. Jasper came in from the barn with his coat still on, stamping snow from his boots, and looked at her at the window and said, "What?" "Final ruling," she said. "The land is mine." He crossed the room without taking his coat off and kissed her, and she put her arms around him with the natural ease of someone who had been doing this for months and intended to do it for a very long time, and he held her with the specific care of a man who had spent years alone in the high country and understood the profound weight of not being alone anymore. "We should celebrate," he said, against her hair. "We should," she said. "But first I need to talk to you about something." He drew back enough to look at her. All right, she had been thinking about this for 2 months. She had organized her thoughts with the same care she gave to surveyed documents and legal filings, because she was who she was, and because this was too important to approach casually. "The business partnership we discussed," she said. "The timber operation. I have been working on numbers, and I think we can establish a mill in the Eastern Valley by next spring if we move quickly on the capital's side. Davis has recommended a mill engineer from Denver. The timber yield over 10 years, she stopped, because he was looking at her with a specific quality of attention that she had learned to recognize as something other than business interest. "What?" she said. "Myrtle," he said. "Will you marry me?" She was quiet for a moment. The window behind her framed the brilliant April pass and the enormous Colorado sky, and the fire in the stove crackled, and the world was very specific and present and real. "You interrupted my timber yield analysis," she said. "I know," he said, unrepentant. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He smiled that wide, unguarded, devastating smile. And she thought, not for the first time, that the most unexpected thing about Jasper Hunter was not his competence or his quiet or his deep understanding of the mountain, but the quality of his happiness, which was whole and unhurried and gave everything it had. They were married in June of 1883, in a ceremony at the Caldwell Crossing Church that was attended by Granger, Davis, and approximately 40 people who had formed opinions about the pair over the previous 7 months, and were gratified to see those opinions confirmed. The day was bright and warm, and the mountains above the town were a deep summer green. The snow line retreated to the highest peaks, and Myrtle wore a dress she had made herself from material she had ordered from Denver, deep blue, practical in cut, which several women present felt was insufficiently bridal, and which Myrtle felt was perfectly appropriate for a woman marrying a mountain. Davis gave a toast that was 3 sentences long and entirely sincere, and Granger gave one that ran to 8 minutes and was funnier than anyone had expected from a small, precise man. And afterward Jasper danced with Myrtle on the saloon floor while the fiddle played, and the whole of Caldwell Crossing looked on with the particular benevolence of a community that has decided to approve of something, and is enjoying doing so. Myrtle, who had not danced since she was 16, discovered that Jasper danced with the same quality he did everything, fully committed, attentive to his partner, unhurried. She put her hand on his shoulder and looked up at him in the lamplight and thought about the woman she had been 7 months ago, standing at a survey marker on a frozen pass with her father's notes in her hand, waiting for the mountain to answer her question. The mountain had sent her this man instead. She thought her father would have approved. "Happy," Jasper said, close to her ear. "Extraordinarily," she said. They built the mill in the Eastern Valley by the following spring, as Myrtle had projected, with Davis overseeing the technical work and a lean, efficient engineer from Denver named Marsh managing the construction. It was running by July of 1884. And the first season's yield exceeded Myrtle's most optimistic projections, which she had written up in a ledger that she kept with the same precision she had once applied to Edwin Harlan's books, and which she found infinitely more satisfying, for reasons that were both personal and philosophical. The business partnership she had proposed to Jasper in a hotel room in November of 1882 became the Hunter Conley Land and Timber Company, incorporated in the Colorado Territory in August of 1884. The name a subject of brief, affectionate negotiation in which Jasper had initially suggested Hunter Timber and Myrtle, had countered with Conley Hunter, and they had arrived at the joint ordering as a compromise, which Myrtle considered a perfectly representative model of their marriage in general. In September of 1884, Myrtle told Jasper that they were expecting a child. He received this information standing in the kitchen of their house with a mug of coffee, and his expression did the thing she loved most about it, the careful composure dissolving into something open and clear and entirely real. He set down the coffee very slowly, as though he needed both hands free for what came next, and crossed the kitchen and held her for a long time without saying anything, and she felt him breathing against her hair. "A family," he said, eventually. "Yes," she said. "Your father would have wanted to see this," he said, and she felt the specific warm ache of it, the knowledge that Arthur Conley had died not knowing what he had left her, had worried he was leaving her nothing, and that she was standing in a house on his land with Jasper Hunter's arms around her, and a future so solid and specific it could be surveyed and documented and measured. "He knows," she said. She was not a particularly religious woman, and she did not usually speak in those terms, but she said it with a conviction that had nothing to do with theology and everything to do with the quality of love that outlasts the people who carry it. Their son was born in the spring of 1885, in the house on the western side of the pass, attended by the doctor from Caldwell Crossing, who made the 2-hour ride in April mud, with the resigned competence of a man who had made worse journeys for worse reasons. The labor was long, and Jasper sat in the outer room with Davis for company, neither of them speaking much, both of them listening to the sounds from the other side of the door, with the particular calibrated attention of men accustomed to reading information from landscape. When the doctor came out and said it was done and both were well, Davis stood up and shook Jasper's hand and then went outside, because he was Davis, and that was exactly the right amount of ceremony for Davis. Jasper went in. Myrtle was propped against the pillows looking exhausted and entirely resolute, which was so precisely herself that he felt something in his chest that had no name in any language he knew. She was holding the baby, a boy, the doctor had said, big and healthy, with the focused attention she gave to everything that mattered. She looked up at Jasper as he came in. "Come and meet your son," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed and she put the baby in his arms with the careful transfer of something infinitely precious, and Jasper looked down at the small, serious face and felt the world complete itself in a way he had not known it needed to. "Arthur," Myrtle said. He looked at her. "You want to name him Arthur?" "My father found this land," she said. "He should live in it." Jasper looked back at the baby, at Arthur, and felt the full weight of everything. The mountain, the pass, the long years alone, the woman he had found at the top of the world reading her father's documents in the cold, the improbable and complete life that had grown out of that moment. "Arthur Hunter," he said. "Arthur Conley Hunter," she said. "Obviously," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. Little Arthur grew up as children grow up in the high country, sturdy and observant, with his father's quiet and his mother's focused attention, prone to climbing things and surveying the results from the top with an expression of assessment that made Davis laugh every time he saw it. By the time Arthur was 3, he was accompanying Jasper on the shorter rides around the property, with the gravity of someone conducting an official inspection, which Myrtle found both endearing and entirely appropriate. In 1887, when Arthur was 2 years old, Myrtle received one more piece of business from Edwin Harlan. Not a legal challenge this time, but a letter in the familiar handwriting of the man himself, brief and without preamble, informing her that the Harlan Trading Company was in the process of reorganizing its territorial interests, and that the remaining disputed parcels adjacent to the Conley grant were being offered for sale. He had included a figure. Myrtle showed the letter to Jasper over breakfast. He read it once and set it down. "He needs capital," he said. "Yes," she said. "The St. Louis business has been poorly managed for some time. I was watching it decline for the last 2 years I worked there. Do you want the parcels?" She picked up the letter. The figure Edwin had named was high, considerably higher than the parcel's current value, priced on the assumption that her need to secure the full boundary of her land would override her commercial judgment. She thought about Edwin in his office in St. Louis, comfortable and arrogant and incapable of conceiving of her as a person with commercial judgment to override. "I want the parcels," she said. "I do not want to pay that price." She set the letter down and picked up her coffee. "I will write to Granger." Granger negotiated on her behalf, with the precision and mild-mannered tenacity that Myrtle had come to love about him, and the final price was 40% below Edwin's initial figure, which Granger said was a fair reflection of current market value, and which Myrtle considered a fair reflection of the specific satisfaction of conducting business with Edwin Harlan at a disadvantage. The deed transferred in March of 1888. The Hunter Conley Land and Timber Company now encompassed the full original grant plus the adjacent parcels, and the Eastern Valley with its mill was the most productive private timber operation in the upper Colorado Territory. And the pass, Blackthorn Pass, Jasper's father's claim, the path that connected all of it, was still theirs, would always be theirs, had been defended by 2 generations of stubbornness and would be defended by a third. On the day the deed transferred, Myrtle put on her mountain boots and her coat and walked up to the pass alone in the early morning, while the house was still quiet and Arthur was asleep and Jasper was in the barn. She walked the 4 miles easily now, in boots that fit the terrain, in a body that had spent 6 years learning what the mountain asked, and stood at the iron survey marker in the gray March light. She took out her father's compass. She held it in both hands. The needle pointed north with the steady, indifferent accuracy it had maintained for 30 years, through all of it, through her father's life and death, through St. Louis and a stranger's letter, through ice passes and legal hearings, and a man she had not expected to find, through a son named for a man who had surveyed this ground before either of them was what they were to each other. She thought about her father. She told him what had happened, not out loud but in the particular internal way that the people we have loved most continue to receive our news even after they are gone, and she thought she could feel his precise, steady satisfaction, the satisfaction of a man who had done careful work and trusted that it would survive him. She put the compass in her pocket and turned to walk back down, and Jasper was there, 50 feet below on the trail, sitting his horse and watching her with that open, real expression, having apparently decided, in the way he made his decisions, that she might want company on the way down even if she had not needed it on the way up. "You followed me," she said when she reached him. "Yes," he said. No apology, no justification. She looked at him on his horse against the vast Colorado sky, the mountain at his back, the pass spread out around them, and she thought about finding a destination, about the long, complicated, improbable journey that had brought her to this specific place and set of circumstances, and about how none of it had been what she expected and all of it had been exactly right. "Come here," she said. He swung down from his horse. She met him in the middle and kissed him in the cold March air on the mountain her father had surveyed, and she had fought for, and they had built together, with the practical and wholehearted completeness that had characterized their marriage from the beginning. And the pass was immense and silent around them, and the sky was enormous and indifferent in the way of great things that do not require anything of you but your presence. They rode back down together. Arthur was awake when they returned, standing at the kitchen window with his small, serious face pressed against the glass, watching for them. When they came through the door, he said, with the gravity of a 2-year-old conducting an assessment, "Where did you go?" "The pass," Myrtle said, pulling off her gloves. "Why?" "To see something," she said. He considered this. "What did you see?" She looked at Jasper, who was hanging up his coat with that quiet competence and who looked back at her with his real expression, the open, warm, certain one that she thought of still as the most honest thing she had ever been shown. "Everything I needed," she said. Arthur accepted this with the satisfaction of someone who has received a complete answer and turned back to the window, where the mountain was bright in the morning light, enormous and specific and entirely real, pressing against the glass with all its indifferent beauty, asking nothing and giving everything to the people who knew how to receive it. In the years that followed, 2 more children came to the house on the western side of the pass. The second was a girl they named Clara, with Myrtle's gray eyes and Jasper's precise, patient attention, who grew up to be as comfortable on horseback as on foot, and who demonstrated at age 4 that she had inherited her grandfather's instinct for reading terrain. The third was another boy they named Edward, which was Jasper's father's name, and who had his grandmother's coloring and his mother's organizational instincts, and who spent his childhood keeping meticulous records of the property's wildlife populations in a small notebook that he guarded with fierce seriousness. The mill ran every season. Davis retired in 1891, and the celebration in Caldwell Crossing lasted 2 days, and Davis made a speech that was 7 sentences long, which was a personal record, and Myrtle hugged him and said she owed him more than she could put in a ledger, and he said that was all right. He had never liked ledgers. Granger argued the Hunter Conley Company's cases until 1893, when his eyesight failed enough that he could no longer read fine print, at which point he retired to the house on Elm Street that he had occupied for 30 years and began writing a memoir about the territory's legal history that he said would be either a definitive account or a very long personal complaint, and possibly both. Edwin Harlan died in St. Louis in 1894 of a heart failure that the newspapers described with the oblique respect given to men of commerce regardless of what their commerce had been. Myrtle read the obituary, set it down, and went back to the quarterly yield report she had been writing. Jasper, when she told him, was quiet for a moment and then said, "Does it feel like anything?" "Completion," she said, after thinking about it. "Like a very long equation that has finally been balanced." He nodded. That was exactly right. In 1895, Arthur was 10 years old, and he began accompanying Myrtle on her survey walks with a transit level that Davis had left him, and he asked questions that were so precise and well-formed that Myrtle sometimes had to stop on the trail and look at him for a moment before answering, overwhelmed by the particular recognition of watching her father's way of seeing pass through a generation and take root in a new person. One afternoon in October, the high October of the Colorado Territory, when the aspen had gone entirely gold and the air had that crystalline impossible clarity that Jasper had once told her was like nothing else in the world, Myrtle and Arthur walked to the pass together. She brought the compass. He brought his transit level. They worked their way up the trail she knew by heart now, every stone and turn and windbreak, the trail she had first climbed in city boots with a valise and a desperate hope, and they arrived at the survey marker in the afternoon light. Arthur put his eye to the transit and took a reading and wrote it down. "The marker has not moved," he said with satisfaction. "No," she said. "Your grandfather put it in well." He looked at the marker. He was his grandfather's height, she thought, or would be, one day, and he had the same quality of attending to a landscape that had always made Arthur Conley one of the finest surveyors in the territory. "Tell me about him again," he said. She told him. She told him about the precise, steady man who had loved the high country with the pure love of someone who understands what they are looking at, who had spent 15 years in these mountains doing work that was careful and true, who had died worrying that he had left his daughter nothing, not knowing that he had left her this. She told the story in the order it had happened, leaving nothing out, and Arthur listened with his small, serious face tipped toward the marker and the mountain and the enormous October sky. When she finished, he said, "And then Father found you here." "He found me here," she said. "I had already found what I needed, but he found me." Arthur thought about this for a moment, the way he thought about everything completely and without hurry. "I am glad he came," he said. Myrtle looked out over the valley, over the pass and the timber and the mill, and the land that was hers and Jasper's and their children's, and one day their children's children's, the land that had been her father's, and before that had been nobody's in the way that land is truly nobody's before the people who love it arrive. She felt the compass in her coat pocket, the dent in its case where a horse had knocked it from her father's hand in a rocky place not far from where she stood. "Yes," she said. "I am glad he came too." She heard hoofbeats on the trail below them, the specific gait of Jasper's horse, which she could identify as easily as a voice by now. A moment later he came into view, riding with that easy competence he had always had, and he looked up and saw them at the marker and raised a hand, and the afternoon light fell on him from the west and made him golden and specific and entirely real. He rode up and dismounted and stood beside her looking out over the valley, and Arthur had already turned back to his transit with the focused industry of someone who has important things to measure, and Myrtle leaned against Jasper's shoulder and felt the mountain around them, the immense, specific, indifferent mountain that had asked everything of them and given everything back. "I was thinking," she said. "What about?" "That woman who walked up here in November of 1882, she said, "in the wrong boots, carrying her father's notes." He was quiet for a moment, his arm around her. "What about her?" "She was right," Myrtle said. "About everything she came here to do, she did it." "Yes," Jasper said, "she did. And then she found something she had not come for," she said. His arm tightened around her. "So did I," he said. Below them the valley was October gold, and the mill sat dark and solid at the valley's edge, and the house was visible in the middle distance, smoke rising from its chimney in the cold, still air. Clara would be doing her lessons. Edward would be counting birds. The mountain was the same mountain it had always been, enormous and patient and specific. The mountain that had shaped Jasper Hunter and received Arthur Conley's careful work, and sent Myrtle the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. She put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the compass and thought of her father, and thought of the long, circuitous, improbable path that had brought her from a back office in St. Louis to this mountain in this October light with this man, and these children, and this life that was so complete and specific it could be surveyed. She thought that all of it, every step, every cold mile, every legal filing, every conversation in firelight, every morning in the high country with the sky pressing down enormous and bright, had been a kind of precision. The precision of a woman who knew how to read a landscape and was not afraid of what she found there. Arthur looked up from his transit. "Mother," he said, "come and check my reading." She went. She bent over the instrument with her son's hand on her shoulder and her husband at her back and the mountain all around them, and read the numbers he had written, and they were exactly right. "Well done," she said. "Your grandfather would be proud." Arthur smiled, a wide, unguarded, devastating smile that she recognized from his father and that she knew, now, she would be seeing for the rest of her life, passing through generations, carrying forward everything that had been given and built and fought for and loved on this mountain, all the way down through time, as precise and enduring as a survey mark driven into stone. The sun moved toward the high peaks and the shadows lengthened across the pass, and they started down together, the three of them, toward the smoke and the warmth and the house that was home, and the mountain watched them go with its enormous, patient indifference, and the compass pointed north, and the land held what had been placed in it.